Young Pokemon players today who haven't played the earlier generations will never understand some of the struggles that we went through. There have been so many quality of life changes over the years that we really do have it so much easier compared to years ago. So, I want to go over some of the major and underlooked changes throughout the Pokemon series. Here are some of the most notable improvements in the Pokemon games. Back in Gen 1, unless you had a bicycle, players were restricted to the regular walking speed. Kinda sucked, especially given how fast walking is. It wasn't until Gen 3 players got a faster option of movement in the form of running shoes, but you had to unlock them. In Fire Red and Leaf Green, you weren't able to run until you beat the first gym leader. Pretty unnecessary if you ask me. And even when we could run, we weren't allowed to run inside some buildings. How lame is that? Now, running is literally a default movement option, as it should be. Pokemon players today will never understand the struggle of being stuck in a cave without repels, moving at a snail's pace. Premier Balls are a nice little gift you get for buying 10 Pokeballs. Well, did you know that not only were Premier Balls not a thing before Gen 3, but even before Gen 8, no matter how many Pokeballs you bought at once, you'd only receive 1 Premier Ball per purchase. So if you're someone who wanted to take advantage of the Premier Ball system and get as many Premier Balls as you could, you'd have to buy exactly 10 Pokeballs each purchase, which could be pretty time consuming. Luckily now today, the Premier Balls stack up, so buying 60 Pokeballs for example gives you 6 Premier Balls. How it should always have been. A lesser known quality of life change that's pretty convenient either way. Can you believe that there are some Pokemon players nowadays that never had to deal with HMs? Today, HMs are no longer a thing, which is good, but before they could be very annoying. You needed to teach your Pokemon these moves in order to progress the game, essentially wasting move slots, given how bad some of these HM moves were. And the worst part is that you couldn't get rid of HM moves without a move deleter. Not only that, but move deleters didn't even exist in Gen 1, meaning that if you taught Cut to your Charmander, thinking you'd get rid of it later, tough. It had Cut forever. Luckily today, not only are HMs again gone for good, there aren't really moves that you can't forget anymore. Speaking of which, learning moves in general is better than it's ever been. Essentially for the longest time, Pokemon couldn't get new moves on their own. They either had to get them through a specific level, or with a compatible TM or HM. Before Gen 3, if you caught a Pokemon that was past the level that it would learn a move, that move was pretty much gone for good. Gen 3 then introduced the Move Relearner, allowing Pokemon to relearn moves from previous levels. This usually costs the player a heart scale, which could be pretty annoying to find if they didn't have one. However, in the current gen, players have it so much easier. Both move deleters and move relearners are gone for good, because you can have a Pokemon relearn any moves for free whenever you want, even moves that they've learned through a TM. That's crazy. Would you believe that there was a time there were some Pokemon games where there was only one TM of a specific move, and if you used it, that TM was gone for good? Now, you can pretty much get any TM you want, whenever you want, and if you teach a Pokemon that TM, they essentially have that move forever. That's awesome. Definitely one of the nicest changes they've made. We can't talk about improvements without mentioning how different a lot of Pokemon look. Can you believe that Venusaur at one point looked like this? Massive change for the better if you ask me. Here are some other examples I really like to point out. Yes, some Pokemon have really aged very well. In the past, making competitive Pokemon with perfect stats and moves that you want was very time consuming, especially if you made the Pokemon you want, but ended up wanting to change something about it. You'd basically have to start from scratch. Now, making competitive Pokemon has never been easier. It basically went from people spending an entire day to create one Pokemon with pretty good IVs, preferred EVs, correct nature, egg moves, etc., to now being able to create the exact same Pokemon, if not better, in about 5 minutes. Hell, if you wanted, you could just catch any Pokemon in the wild and drug it up to have perfect EVs, IVs, and egg moves that you want. Back then you had to breed the correct Pokemon with a specific move to get the egg moves that you want, on top of hoping for the correct nature and good IVs. Now, you can just take them on a picnic. Seriously, there is no easier and faster way to making a perfect competitive Pokemon. Outside of, cheating. The EXP share for many of us was a godsend. Before the current EXP share, only the Pokemon that were in battle would gain experience. Now, is your whole team. No more sending out your weak Magikarp and then swapping it out for your other Pokemon, letting your other Pokemon get hit, and having to go back to the Pokemon Center or healing it. It's a massive time saver. Now the EXP share has actually existed in Pokemon since the beginning, being called the EXP All back in Gen 1. However, sometime after Gen 1, it acted as just one item that you would give to one Pokemon that was in your party, and it also gained experience instead of your whole team. The EXP All in Gen 1 did give experience to the whole party, but it wasn't as much experience as it is today, and you get the item pretty late into the game, compared to the EXP share today that is turned on from the beginning of the game. Makes grinding and leveling up much easier. Remember back in the day when the only Pokeballs in the game that we had access to were the regular Pokeball, the Great Ball, the Ultra Ball, and the Master Ball? Now there's tons to pick from, all of which do different things for different situations, with arguably the most helpful being the Quick Ball. Seriously, when the Scarlet and Violet DLC dropped, I almost exclusively used Quick Balls, and you probably did too. I don't want to hear any slander towards Quick Balls. They're arguably the most useful Pokeballs in the game. A small change that didn't last long, however in my opinion was an improvement that I'd love to see come back, is the change to Freeze in Legends Arceus, being changed to Frostbite. Freeze, as we all know, is dumb. While having a low chance of happening, when it does happen, it's straight up unfair. Your Pokemon basically becomes useless until it thaws out of the freeze, which is only a 20% chance. Yeah, very fair. 20% by itself, or being hit by a fire move or another specific move. And in the old generations, the chances of unthawing by yourself was even lower, or straight up impossible without a freeze heal. In Legends Arceus, freeze was changed to Frostbite, which was basically the same as burn, except instead of lowering the target's physical attack, it lowered the special attack. This was such a good idea, especially when there are a lot of things in Pokemon that hurt physical attackers compared to special attackers. Unfortunately, it seems that this is going to be exclusive to the Legends games, but honestly, I think the Pokemon metagame would probably benefit a lot if Frostbite permanently replaced Freeze. And I know I'm not the only one who thinks this. Pokemon gym leaders can be pretty tough if you don't have the right Pokemon for the job. The Kanto games are infamous for being difficult if you started with Charmander, since the first two gym leaders straight up counter fire types. Over the years though, Game Freak really has tried to help us with this. In Fire Red and Leaf Green only, Charmander can learn the move Metal Claw pretty early on, giving you a much better chance against Brock's rock types. And in Let's Go Pikachu and Eevee, the game straight up doesn't allow you to continue into the gym battle without having a Pokemon that's strong against the gym type. But Scarlet and Violet arguably has the best improvements to gyms, letting us battle them in whatever order we want. Don't want to fight against the grass type gym leader with your water type starter? No problem, go find the bug type gym instead. Overall, great idea that will hopefully be a thing in future Pokemon games. I remember a small detail in Red and Blue, there was a free potion in the PC that you could get at the very beginning of the game. This was back when you could store items in the PC, because we only had a limited amount of space for items on us at a time. Now, we pretty much have unlimited item space, meaning that storing items on the PC hasn't been a thing for years. The PC was also how we withdrew and deposited our Pokemon. Now, the PC is just straight up on us at all times. No more having to fly to a Pokemon Center to trade out Pokemon. We can do it wherever we want. Easily one of the best improvements we've had in a Pokemon game. Didn't you just hate it when you're trying to get somewhere? Then boom, a trainer stops you and forces you to battle them. Especially those trainers that you missed the first time without noticing, and now you're having to waste time battling them with their hilariously underleveled team in comparison. Now, we can pretty much choose when we battle an NPC, instead of being forced to. Another small, yet convenient change. For years, some Pokemon just never got any love. In the most recent generations, however, so many Pokemon have been getting brand new evolutions, most of which were definitely needed. For example, Stantler was a pretty much nothing Pokemon for over 20 years. It was terrible back then, and was still terrible today. That is until Legends Arceus finally gave it the evolution it needed. Now Stantler is actually worth catching. There are still many other Pokemon that haven't received any love at all for years, that would greatly benefit from an evolution. So I'm sure they'll get something eventually, given how many Pokemon have been getting them recently. Back in past generations, if we wanted to throw a Pokeball at a Pokemon, this is how long it will take. Now it takes this long. Having this quick option was a great idea. Another small Pokeball improvement is being able to pass down Pokeballs through Pokemon breeding. It's a tiny change for sure, but still a cool inclusion. There was a certain charm to random encounters in Pokemon. While sometimes annoying, they've been a staple part of the series since the beginning. Overworld Encounters, however, are arguably a massive improvement. We can see exactly what we're encountering. It saves so much time, especially when we're encountering Pokemon we don't want to, and Overworld Shinies. On top of this, we now have auto-battling in Scarlet and Violet, another big time saver when it comes to grinding, instead of having to fight one Pokemon at a time. Hopefully Game Freak build up upon this in the next Pokemon game. Game Freak have done a good job changing things so we don't have to go to a specific area, like the Pokemon Center for something so small, like going to the PC when we want to change Pokemon. And another improvement to that is nicknaming. Gone are the days of needing to talk to an NPC that specialised in nicknaming. Not only are our nickname skills now great enough that we can nickname any Pokemon we want at any time, but we can also finally nickname traded Pokemon. Granted, you can only nickname them once, but it's much better than never being able to nickname a traded Pokemon, and it keeping its dumb nickname forever. Let's talk about some Pokemon moves that got buffs that they really needed, and in a lot of cases deserved. Here are a couple of my favourite examples. Leech Life was the first move that came to mind. That super weak annoying move that Zubat would always spam. In Gen 7, it went from 20 power to 80 power, going from one of the worst bug type moves to easily one of the best. Another move is Fent, introduced as the anti-protect move, being a move that was able to go through the Pokemon protecting itself. Unfortunately in Gen 4, it only worked if the Pokemon protected itself, meaning it was pretty risky and straight up useless if the opponent didn't protect when you used it. But after Gen 4, Fent now deals damage even if the opponent doesn't protect, making it kind of a special type of quick attack. Definitely some of the most deserved and needed changes. Ever since Gen 6, players have been able to dress up their character outside of the default look. The clothing options have been pretty limited, but they're getting better with each generation, compared to Gen 1, where you're forced to look like this. Not only that, but in the most recent Pokemon games, they've even got rid of the gender option, allowing players to pretty much have any hairstyle, any dress options, and aren't limited to the customization. Definitely a really good change moving forward. Next, here's one improvement or addition each third game of the series added to the originals. Pokemon Yellow, the player was able to catch all 3 starter Pokemon, meaning they didn't have to pick between them. Pokemon Crystal was the first time that the player was able to choose a female character. Pokemon Emerald had one of the best additions to any Pokemon game, the Battle Frontier. Pokemon Platinum had the Distortion World, one of the best areas containing a legendary Pokemon. And Black and White 2, while technically not the quote-unquote third version, were the first official sequels to a main series Pokemon game, and included another fan favourite addition being the World Tournament, which had almost every past gym leader and champion from previous games. Finally, let's talk about the improvements that the remakes added. For Fire Red and Leaf Green, aside from Charmander being able to learn Metal Claw, this was essentially a massive update to the original Red and Blue, with one of the most notable additions being the Sevi Islands, consisting of 7 extra islands the player got to explore. Let's Go Pikachu and Eevee had one of the most important features, changing random encounters to Overworld Encounters, setting a standard for the main series games after. Heart Gold and Soul Silver is considered by many as people's favourite Pokemon game in the franchise, one of the reasons being that Pokemon could follow you, being one of the most requested features of any Pokemon game. Probably the biggest addition to Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire was the inclusion of the Delta episode, a completely separate bit of side content that we could do after completing the main game. That and Marvel City getting completely reworked. Pretty big upgrade. And as almost identical Brilliant Diamond and Shining Pearl is to the originals, there are some notable things they added. It had character customization, although pretty limited. It also had the highly requested feature of Pokemon following us. It had a new underground, although this did mean that our secret bases didn't really feel that personal. But at least they tried something new, I guess. Yeah, would have preferred the Battle Frontier if we're being real. And those are 20 notable improvements that we've gotten over the years within the Pokemon franchise. Hopefully Game Freak continue to improve upon their games. Additionally, I also want to talk about some of the biggest downgrades that have happened within the Pokemon games, so stay tuned for that. And if you did enjoy, please do leave a like, as it does help the video out, subscribe for more Pokemon content in the future, and until next time, thank you so much for watching.